On a Saturday night in central London, the queue stretches halfway down the block. People wait for 2 hours. Not for a Michelin-starred tasting menu. Not for a celebrity chef's latest creation. They are waiting to sit around a boiling pot of chili oil and cook their own food. The restaurant is Haidilao, a Chinese hot pot chain, and the bubbling, crimson broth inside those pots traces its origins to one of the poorest neighborhoods in early 20th century China, where dock workers, too broke to buy proper meat, invented a meal from the parts that everyone else threw away. This is the story of how a survival meal became a global empire. To understand Chongqing hot pot, you first have to understand Chongqing. The city sits at the junction of the Yangtze and Jialing rivers in southwestern China, wrapped in fog for most of the year. The climate is brutally humid in summer and bone cold in winter. For centuries, the rivers made Chongqing a vital trading hub, and with trade came thousands of laborers, boatmen, porters, dock workers, who loaded and unloaded cargo along the wharves of Jiangbei district. In the 1920s, these workers faced a simple problem. They were exhausted, freezing, and poor. Meat was a luxury they could not afford. But the slaughterhouses along the riverbank discarded enormous quantities of offal, beef tripe, stomachs, livers, intestines, parts that butchers considered worthless, so the workers bought what no one else wanted. They cleaned the organs, sliced them thin, and dropped them into clay pots filled with boiling water, dried chilies, and Sichuan peppercorns. The pots were divided into sections by iron partitions, and each worker would cook their food in their own compartment, eating only what they put in, paying only for what they consumed. It was not a recipe born from inspiration. It was a recipe born from hunger. The chilies and peppercorns were not gourmet choices. They served a practical purpose. The intense spice masked the strong flavors of cheap offal, and the heat from the peppers warmed bodies soaked by river mist. For these workers, the pot was not a dining experience. It was survival, but something unexpected happened. The dish was addictive, not in a casual sense, in a neurological one. The signature flavor of Chongqing hot pot is called mala, a Chinese word that combines ma, meaning numbing, and la, meaning spicy. The numbing comes from Sichuan peppercorns and the spicy from dried chilies. Together, they create a sensation that no other cuisine in the world replicates. Here is why. Sichuan peppercorns contain a molecule called hydroxyalpha-sansual. When it touches your lips and tongue, it does not create pain the way chili peppers do. Instead, it activates touch-sensitive nerve fibers, causing them to vibrate at roughly 50 Hz, the same frequency as a low electrical hum. Food historian Harold McGee described the effect as similar to touching the terminals of a 9-volt battery to your tongue. Your brain receives signals of touch, cold, and pain simultaneously from nerves that do not normally talk to each other. The result, in McGee's words, is a kind of general neurological confusion. Now combine that with capsaicin from the chilies, which triggers pain receptors and floods the brain with endorphins. The two compounds together, one numbing, one burning, create a feedback loop of sensation and relief. Eating mala hot pot does to your mouth what a roller coaster does to your body. It overwhelms your senses with something that feels dangerous, but is perfectly safe. And like a roller coaster, you want to do it again as soon as it is over. This addictive quality is what lifted hot pot out of the dockyards. By 1934, a small restaurant in Chongqing became the first to serve hot pot as a proper sit-down dish rather than street food. Over the following decades, the meal climbed steadily through Chinese society, shedding its association with poverty and becoming a communal ritual, a centerpiece of family gatherings, business dinners, and celebrations. By 2019, the city of Chongqing alone had nearly 27,000 hot pot restaurants. To put that in perspective, that is almost twice the number of Starbucks locations across the entire United States at the time. But the real explosion came from a man who did not even know how to cook. In 1994, a young man named Zhang Yong opened a tiny hot pot restaurant in Jianyang, a small city in Sichuan province. Zhang Yong was a high school dropout who had worked as a welder in a tractor factory. His startup capital was 8,000 yuan, roughly $1,000, scraped together with 3 friends. He had no culinary training, no business degree, and by his own admission, his cooking was mediocre at best. What he had was an insight that would prove more valuable than any recipe. He realized that hot pot was not really about the food. It was about the experience. Zhang Yong built Haidilao around an obsessive focus on customer service. Diners waiting for a table received complimentary manicures. Servers offered phone cases to protect devices from steam, hair ties for customers with long hair, and aprons to shield clothing from splashing broth. At some locations, performers pulled fresh noodles by hand in dramatic dance-like routines. The food was good, the spectacle was unforgettable, the formula worked. Haidilao grew into the largest hot pot chain in the world. By 2018, it raised nearly $1 billion in a Hong Kong initial public offering. By 2025, the company operated more than 1,400 restaurants globally, with annual revenue approaching $6 billion and over 125,000 employees. In 2012, Haidilao opened its first location outside mainland China in Singapore. What followed was a systematic expansion across Asia, North America, and crucially, Europe, with the company's overseas arm, Super High International, operating more than 110 restaurants across 14 countries. But Haidilao was not alone. Liu Yishou, another Chongqing-born hot pot chain, expanded to 1,200 locations worldwide. Smaller independent hot pot restaurants began appearing in London, Paris, Amsterdam, and Berlin. According to industry observers, Chinese hot pot became one of the fastest-growing restaurant categories in European cities during the early 2020s. The question is, why Europe? Why would a continent with deeply rooted culinary traditions embrace a meal that requires diners to cook raw ingredients themselves in a pot of boiling chili oil? The answer has several layers. First, hot pot arrived at exactly the moment when European diners, particularly millennials and Generation Z, were growing tired of passive dining. They wanted interaction. They wanted to customize. Hot pot, where you choose your own broth, select your own ingredients from dozens of options, and mix your own dipping sauces from a bar of 20 condiments, is dining as participation. It is the ultimate choose-your-own-adventure meal. Second, the aesthetics were irresistible. The yin-yang pot, half fiery red, half milky white, became an Instagram icon. Videos of thinly sliced beef unfurling in boiling broth, of mushrooms blooming in crimson oil, of steam rising dramatically from the table, generated hundreds of millions of views on TikTok and social media platforms across Europe. Third, and perhaps most importantly, European palates were shifting. A generation raised on global food culture, exposed to Thai curries, Korean gochujang, and Mexican habaneros, was actively seeking intensity. Mala was not just another spicy flavor, it was an entirely new sensory category, one that European cuisine had no equivalent for. And there was a fourth factor, often overlooked. Europe's growing Chinese diaspora, students, professionals, and families, created the initial demand. They filled the first hot pot restaurants in London and Paris, creating a critical mass of authentic, bustling dining scenes. European locals walked past, saw the steam, the crowds, the theatrical spectacle of a meal being cooked at the table, and curiosity did the rest. What began as a taste of home for Chinese expatriates became an adventure for everyone else. But here is the irony that no one talks about. A meal for two at a European Haidilao can easily cost $80 to $100. The ingredients on the table, premium Wagyu beef, fresh seafood, handcrafted tofu, would be unrecognizable to the dock workers who invented this dish. What began as the cheapest possible meal, made from parts that butchers discarded, has become a premium dining experience marketed to affluent urban consumers on the other side of the world. And yet, this trajectory is not unique. Consider fondue, the national dish of Switzerland. It was invented by alpine farmers and peasants who needed a way to use hardened cheese and stale bread during long winters. They melted the cheese, dipped the bread, and called it dinner. Today, fondue is served in upscale ski resorts and elegant European restaurants, its humble origins largely forgotten. Hot pot and fondue are mirror images, two communal meals born from poverty that evolved into cultural exports. The difference is that fondue stayed largely within European borders. Chongqing hot pot crossed oceans. The deeper truth is that it was precisely the constraints of poverty that produced the genius of hot pot. Because the dock workers could not afford prime cuts, they were forced to innovate. They created a cooking method so flexible that it could transform any ingredient, from the cheapest tripe to the most expensive Wagyu, into something delicious. Hot pot does not require a skilled chef. It does not demand a specific recipe. It democratizes cooking itself, handing the power back to the person at the table. That is its real secret. Not the mala, not the spectacle, not the Instagram aesthetics. Chongqing hot pot conquered Europe because it solved a problem that European dining did not even know it had. In an era when meals are increasingly solitary, delivered to doorsteps in cardboard boxes, eaten alone in front of screens, hot pot forces you to slow down. You cannot rush it. The broth needs time to boil. The meat needs time to cook. And while you wait, you talk, you share. You sit around a single pot with the people who matter to you, and you eat from the same fire. 100 years ago, on the foggy wharves of Yangtze, a group of exhausted dock workers sat around a clay pot and did exactly the same thing. They were not creating a global culinary phenomenon. They were just trying to stay warm. But the principle they stumbled upon, that the best meals are the ones you make together, turned out to be universal. 8,000 kilometers and a century apart, from the riverbanks of Chongqing to Oxford Street in London, people are still gathering around the same pot. The ingredients have changed. The reason has not.